My name is Kara Martin, and this is my final project for EDUC 858. And it's my second attempt because the first time I recorded without sound, brutal. So, my presentation today is going to be about reimagining the co curricular. And the goal of today is to find an intersection of my personal interest and industry need, and then to translate what I learn about that intersection into an innovative change for higher education. But first, we have to do some self reflection. So, some values and beliefs that I bring to my work. First, higher ed should be preparing students for their full careers, not just the first 5 years out of school. Some of these metrics that get used to quantify the value of higher education are pretty short term in their perspective. And I think higher ed should be helping students prepare for the full length of their career, all the changes they'll make, all of the transitions, all of the decisions, and shouldn't just be preparing students for that first 5 years or just be preparing them to make a salary that can pay back their education. Second, I believe higher ed should be creating competent, virtuous, and creative lifelong learners. If those three things are not being supplied to graduates, it just seems like there's not much of a point to higher education. Third one, I think, is very widely accepted that higher ed should teach a person how to think, not what to think. And then lastly, higher ed should always leave a graduate better off, not worse. That's a nod to just how expensive tuition has gotten, and that a student should be better off even in the midst of having to pay back their student loans rather than worse off because they have too many loans and not a good enough salary. Some experiences that have shaped these beliefs are I've observed sharp divides between the curricular and co-curricular that can be felt by students. In fact, one area that students are struggling kind of the most academically is learning how to translate what they're learning in the classroom back to their experiences outside of the classroom. I've also seen how much of the value of higher education cannot be academically quantified. So the things that students are learning both in and out of the classroom are really hard to measure. Students can feel it, they can report on it, but it's hard to quantify it, measure it, and deliver on those metrics. Some ethics that I bring to my work. I've observed in the last few years a really high value of mine for justice and inclusion, and that's really kind of what keeps driving me back to this work, what I think will be motivating for a long time in it. I have a desire to see an appropriate balance of power dynamics. I've seen some unhealthy board and president dynamics that are really just in an inappropriate display or balance of power. And so I want to see places that I work have a good power balance. And then lastly, I have a belief in supplying positive outcomes for graduates. That's kind of the bare minimum, right? Is we should be delivering good outcomes for our graduates. I created a really brief SWOT analysis for my own ability to bring innovative changes to higher education. The first is I'm a creative systems thinker. I think in systems. I also tend to be pretty creative with my solutions. I also have a generalist approach, just given, even in my short career history, I've had the opportunity to do several different things that give me a generalist perspective. My degrees also help with that. I have a bachelor's in exercise science, a master's in business, and now soon to be a doctorate of education. But I also have experience with specialist work. So my job leading the Human Sexuality Care Initiative, I've really had to dive deep on one topic. So I've learned what it looks like to become a specialist as well. Some weaknesses are my career is very young, so I just have a short career history, and I lack some experience that will be, I'm sure, gained and incredibly helpful 15, 20 years from now. Opportunities. I'm currently employed at a school that really does value innovation. George Fox really stresses the importance of innovative outcomes. So now's the best time for me to be trying these new ideas. A big threat is that though I am a creative systems thinker, homework and school currently takes most of my creative time and energy. I think I have a limited supply of that every day or every week, and homework takes a lot of it. But I trust that this educational experience is helping develop those skills in a way that once I'm done with school, I'll be able to apply an even more elevated skill level in this area directly towards my work without without having to bring a lot of it to school. A key issue I want to focus on for this presentation is this current, very loud bipartisan agreement that colleges are providing too little benefit at too high a cost. Retention and completion rates are down. Salaries for students coming fresh out of college are not the best. Um, and there's just this kind of widespread national agreement that the benefits are too small and the cost is too high. That's being addressed in multiple different ways from multiple different stakeholders in education. So there's political solutions, there's proposals and acts in both the House and the Senate, as they are kind of tightening up their budgets and figuring out what they're going to be doing under the Trump administration. We could spend a lot of time here. I'll touch on this briefly. Basically, a lot of these proposals would financially penalize colleges for not delivering on metrics. Essentially, the House and the Senate are both viewing higher education as a revenue raiser for the government. And a lot of these ideas would actually disproportionately affect private institutions. So it's just important to be aware of, especially if these things get passed, that private institutions could be more on the hook than public universities. So some of these ideas, could be grounded in things that could be helpful, but also a lot would come with it. A lot of baggage would come with it. So just good to be aware of these things. Within the schools themselves, we're innovating. So a big innovation in the last few years has been for online modalities. So a really popular and I won't say easy, but simple maybe way to cut costs is to just make an entirely virtual experience. So it eliminates the need for physical and personnel resources that drive up tuition for residential students. Of course, it is challenging to deliver a high quality online experience, but the more that we play in this area and learn, I think the more realistic it will be for students to have cut costs when it comes to actually attending an in-person school and making their experience mostly or entirely virtual. Then there's the internal innovations, the creative adaptations and additions to a more traditional residential college experience that could help drive up completion rates and post-graduation metrics. These are often small-scale changes, just little adaptations, little additions that help drive up the value that students are getting from a more traditional college experience. So my own philosophy, this is driven both from work and from the last few years of taking these EDD courses. I do believe that traditional forms of higher ed will continue to exist, both during and after this period of increased scrutiny. But that's the industry as a whole. I think that individual institutions have to be innovative and willing to take risks if they're going to stay in business. Dozens of colleges close every year. And I think a big source of that is an unwillingness to take appropriate risks in order to keep themselves afloat. So my objective for this presentation was to kind of take that idea of the smaller scale creative adaptation changes that can help drive up the value of a traditional residential college experience. So I want to identify innovations in the co-curricular space that could help form competent, virtuous, and creative lifelong learners, returning back to that value of mind that I think those three traits should be developed very strongly in a higher education experience. But why the co-curricular? Why is that so important? I found this article from Inside Higher Ed back in 2016, so it's a little bit old, but I think it's still very true. I have two quotes. The first is, for most college students, it's outside the classroom that they learn about interpersonal relationships, intimacy, managing emotions, and developing an adult identity and sense of direction. But it's also outside the classroom that students can acquire the proficiencies, expertise, and experience that will matter most after graduation. This just highlights, right, all the things that students are learning outside the classroom that are equally, if not more important than what they're learning inside the classroom. But what really drives it home for me is the second quote, and the final sentence in particular. I'll read the whole thing. Today, students frequently complain about high tuition costs, boring classes, and being unable to get into their chosen classes. But when students protest, it's rarely about such matters. That is likely because they are finding the true meaning of college elsewhere. I liked this a lot because though the article is almost a decade old, it's still so true, right? Our students are still complaining about high tuition costs, boring classes, the core curriculum that they think doesn't apply to them, all these sorts of things. And I think the author is onto something when he says we shouldn't just like dismiss these complaints as complaints, right? It's coming from somewhere. It's coming because students are realizing they're learning outside of the classroom, and they're frustrated that they're paying so much money for these things, these courses, that aren't teaching them as much as real life is teaching them. I think that last sentence in particular just really drives it home. So I did some searching around to find these small creative adaptations that schools are using to really drive innovation in the co-curricular space. The first one I'll spend more time on in a little bit, but it's a program called Don't Cancel That Class from John Brown University, that uses co-curricular education and brings it into the curricular when a professor has to miss a class for whatever reason. A co-curricular person will come in and lead an experience during that class time, so that students are still getting something out of the class time, and they're learning things about the co-curricular space. University of Michigan has co-curricular transcripts. So part of their transcript that they get includes service hours, student leadership opportunities, internship experiences, all this sort of thing. I thought that was brilliant, to say, you know what, the things you're learning in these more soft skilled areas are equally as important as the classes and grades that we put on your transcript. When I was a student, I got to do what was essentially a leadership class. They didn't market it as such, but it was really just a leadership class during a backcountry backpacking experience. And there was something about being in the wilderness with a group of other student leaders, learning about leadership, that made the lessons stick so much more than if I'd been with the same group of people in a classroom in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I would love to see programs like this at more schools. Something I really like about my current institution at George Fox is we have what's called a maker hub, and it has all sorts of tools and materials for woodworking, welding, crafting, engineering, lots of tools that students can experience. They have to pass quizzes online to demonstrate competency in using certain tools, and then they have access to them with their ID card. So just a great idea to get students experience with, a lot of like engineers will use it to build prototypes for their courses, that sort of thing. But students can also come in and sew their Halloween costume or build a project out of wood that they saw on Instagram. So just a great co-curricular space to be teaching those physical skills to students. Then lastly, I came across this co-op program at Northeastern University that collaborates the curricular and the co-curricular by having students sit in a classroom and learn, and then go out into the field and experience. And from what I read about this program, it's just a nearly seamless experience that students are getting this co-curricular and curricular education kind of all rolled up into one. But I am going to spend more time on this Don't Cancel That Class initiative because I thought it was brilliant. I learned about this at a conference that I was at just this week. There's an endowed center at John Brown University that's called the Center for Healthy Relationships. And this department basically put together a few selections of materials that they can teach during a 60 to 90 minute, class time. When a professor has to miss class, either well in advance, sometimes professors know months in advance that they're going to be gone a day, or there could be a family emergency and they're reaching out to somebody 2 hours before their class starts. But this center has offered to come into class and teach things like healthy boundaries and safe dating tips and that sort of thing. And they were able to sit in the first year of the program, 22 different classrooms, and interacted with 450 different students. So just brilliant, a really, really smart way to be educating students on these soft skills like co-curricular elements with a captive audience. That's the hardest part about being in the co-curricular space, is you rarely have a captive audience that has to be in the room. I made a SWOT analysis of this program because my idea would be to scale it up to all of student development, not just housed within one specific department. But my idea would be to have basically a catalog of maybe 8 to 15 different learning experiences that a professor could select, and then have that instructor come in and guide the class through that experience. Some strengths would be it maximizes student learning. So they're going to be in the class anyway. Sometimes students get frustrated if a class gets canceled because they're paying a lot of money for their education. So it really maximizes this learning experience. It enhances collaboration, of course, because now faculty and staff who maybe have never interacted before are interacting about how they're going to lead this class. It's flexible and it's customizable on both ends. So the student development professional can kind of create their experience exactly how they want it to play out. But because there's a catalog, a selection of different topics and instructors that a professor could ask to be led in their classroom, the professor also gets to be flexible and customize the experience for their own classroom. So they get some say in what they think would go best with their group of students and their subject matter. It supports institutional goals and it provides a practical faculty alternative. So, kind of minimizing the amount of disruptions that students are experiencing. Some weaknesses, there could be faculty resistance. That's always a weakness with just about any innovative plan on campus. Perception issues, students may see these lessons as less valuable or invaluable. There's logistical challenges. That's a big one because you're collaborating with multiple different stakeholders on this, and there's a lot of plates spinning to keep a program like this going. So I think you need someone to manage the program as a whole. It's also resource intensive, so it takes time, it takes materials, of course. The opportunities, it's so scalable. You could really develop this into a robust and thriving program if you wanted to. You can also improve with a lot of data, so using surveys and that sort of thing to really hone these class experiences is a large opportunity. Interdisciplinary integration goes right along with the collaboration strength, right? So you're integrating all these different elements, all these different fields to create this blended experience that a student receives and increase student engagement. Again, the hard part about being in the co-curricular is the student engagement piece. They have to want to be there in the co-curricular. They have to show up of their own accord. So having some of these spaces where students have to be there could really be a benefit for teaching some of these life skills. Some threats, there's sustainability concerns. I think this is the biggest threat. It just takes a lot of effort to sustain a program like this, especially if it takes a few years to really get underway. I think this could be minimized by having one kind of manager of the full project, but still, it's a logistical lift to keep this program going. Faculty buy-in, of course, it's very possible that for whatever reason, institutional culture, faculty would not be interested in this. You could have student resistance too. I mean, I've been a college student before that was thrilled to have a class canceled so I could sleep in or do homework or what have you. So students may be disengaged in a setting like this. Student or faculty could over rely on this. So maybe you'd see faculty choosing more and more often to not show up to class. I don't think this would really happen, but it's possible. How I would implement this 5-step process. First, I would run it by the provost. There's no point in developing this full program if the provost doesn't think it would work on your campus. So I would run this by the provost first, and then I would create a template for these experience descriptions. So before I start recruiting people to teach these different sections, I would want to create a template for how they would create the content, but particularly the faculty facing side that kind of advertises what they'd be willing to teach. Then I would identify interested student development professionals, and it would be on a interest basis, right? So I'm not going to force anybody to put their name down on something like this. They would have to be interested, and they would select their own topic. They would develop their own materials. Then I would kind of manage the process by, I think this program would be best launched at the beginning of a semester, ideally the fall semester. So I'd work my way backwards to set some deadlines for submitting both a description for a catalog, but then also having their content ready to go before it's published so that I know, okay, if this person signed up, they're ready to do what they said they would do. Then the very final step would be marketing to faculty and the faculty development team. So directly to faculty during faculty and service days, in campus announcements, that sort of thing. But then also making sure I've been collaborating with our faculty development director would be really important for this, I think. And then, of course, it's important to assess a program like this because it takes a lot of resources, it takes time, it's hard to sustain. So you'd want to see, is this worth it? And over the short term, that'd be easy to just do student surveys. So at the end of each classroom experience, require that each um, of the guest lecturers is taking either a required or an optional survey to see if the content was worth it, if it was engaging, if students liked it, but then also to kind of measure what students learned throughout their experience. But I believe you would see some long term impacts, and I wrote a few of these ideas down. So you might see an increased use in services. So, for example, if a counselor on your campus comes and talks to students about how to set healthy boundaries or how to manage their time well, they would also, more likely than not, talk about the additional services they provide at their counseling center. And so you may see increased use in services as students remember, oh, yeah, that's an option for me. Um, you may see decreased roommate conflicts. This would be great. If you have area coordinators or resident directors coming in to talk about conflict management and how to have good conversations, how to active listen, that sort of thing, it's possible that you would start to see students build the competencies to resolve these smaller issues on their own without having to tap in a mediator or someone else. You may see increased student leadership interest. So, a lot of these co curricular educators hire student leaders for various important kind of frontline roles on campus. These are important positions that really set the tone and campus culture. And if you have more of these professionals in front of students more frequently, you may see a increased interest. You may see more applications, all that sort of thing for your student leadership positions. Then lastly, I just said impact to Title IX or bias incident reporting. That's because so if you had someone on your Title IX team or someone come in to talk about bias incidents and teach students either the reporting process, how to identify an issue if it comes up, or prevention strategies, initially what you get is an increase in reports. So as students are becoming educated just on what sexual harassment or bias incidents look like, you probably get an increase in reports. In the super long term, the idea would be reporting would go down because the prevention strategies and education are actually working, but you wouldn't see that right away. You would actually see an increase. So that's my idea. I think I'm going to actually give it a shot on campus and float it by some people and see if there's interest. Like I said, George Fox is a great place to implement ideas like this because they're all about driving innovative outcomes for students. Um, Thank you for your time, and I'm excited to pursue this opportunity at George Fox.